The biggest public demonstration in South Korea's history was peaceful, but had a very clear message. President Park Geun-hye should be removed from office now, not in a few months' time. The protests, which flared up in Seoul and at over 60 other locations nationwide, showed growing public anger towards the president over a corruption scandal, with frustration fueled by what citizens regard as political protection for her presidency.
A day earlier, 3 opposition parties submitted an impeachment bill against the president, though the timing of the vote has been delayed, following an offer by the president to voluntarily leave office before the end of her term. She asked Parliament to set a timetable for her early departure, knowing that her own group, the Sainuri Party, which controls 128 votes of the 300-member Parliament, could have enough power to prevent the impeachment bill from being passed. But the public are not satisfied with the delaying tactics. It is estimated that over 2.3 million people demonstrated to put pressure on Park to leave now. In Seoul, organisers claimed the demonstration eventually grew in the city to 1.7 million people, the biggest in the nation's history, and much larger even than the demonstration in June 1987, when the public were calling for more democracy.
How does corruption affect South Korea's democratic development? And what does this say about the health of South Korea's society? Simple questions with important answers. Now, the president, the daughter of whom many would call a dictator, was nominated by her party and elected by popular vote. Those around her seem to have taken advantage of their positions. So who is to blame for the current crisis? We asked the public in South Korea.
Of course, the blame goes to Park and her group, because they must have been aware of the fact that Park is such an incompetent, ignorant and corrupt person, and if they hadn't been aware of it, they are just as incompetent. They definitely knew and used Park, a woman who does not have the ability to participate in government administration, and used that for constant corruption and their own interest.
I think Park is the first to blame for all of this, and also the politicians who have to represent the will of the people. The Sainuri Party has responsibility because they have sought their own interest.
I think the fundamental problem is that if you think of it as a problem of the organisation, then it's the leader's problem. Whatever the issues the people surrounding her had, it should have been the president who had to make the decisions. So I think the president is the biggest to blame on this.
There are a lot of people who are under suspicion, but the special prosecution is still working on it, and I think the people who are proven guilty should be held responsible under the law, including Park, of course, if she is proven guilty.
The entire blame is on President Park. Why? Because appointing the wrong people or picking the wrong people to associate with, like Cho Seung-sil, problems have happened from these faulty decisions. So the entire blame is rightly on President Park.
I think this is time for everyone to say mea culpa, because we are the one who elected President Park Geun-hye. You can say that I didn't vote for her, but we are also all accountable for the actual result of the election, and we wished all the best for the new president to be successful. So the main responsibility, of course, lies in President Park Geun-hye and her staff members and the confidant, her friends, who committed many wrongdoings, violating constitutional order. But at the same time, there is a widespread sense of responsibility and regret among South Korean public. It is a very trying time for South Korean people. We knew what we are going to get, and this is not what we expected to get.
지난 과정을 봤을 때 박근혜 대통령이 이 국정을 운영할 능력이
Seeing the past processes, it's been revealed that the President Park does not have the ability to conduct state affairs, and we can assume that major actors, the family corporations, knew this. The Sainuri Party already knew this. This is a situation we should all be held responsible, including the president, those in power and the Sunari party.
대통령과 더불어 뭐 실세들 그리고 새누리당 뭐 다 같이 이제 물어야 되는 그 책임을 져야 하는 그런 상황입니다.
Why are the protests so big? And how do the public think this compares with the mass protests of the past?
People are voluntarily rising up in a large scale, and the corruption within politicians who have to represent the people was too extreme, and the president herself has been using taxpayers' money to seek her own interest and not using it for the people. That's why people are expressing their anger and voluntarily rising up.
The media has also talked about this lots. The Conservatives are coming out to protest, and I think the reason lies on the sense of betrayal. They have believed in them and casted a vote to work for the country, to work for us. But the sense of betrayal led the people to come out to protest.
Wow, I've never seen a protest this big, and I don't have any memory. But as I've said earlier, this situation just doesn't make any sense. The people are feeling the same way. They feel deceived. Can't believe how a leader of a country can be so incompetent, and I think the rage and disappointment due to this is why people are coming out to the protests.
In a sense, I think we can say that this incident happened because of our indifference. It's the president we elected under democracy. Therefore, the people should also be held responsible, and people are holding up to their responsibility by going to protests.
This incident can be seen as a fraud committed by the country to their people. I feel, as a Korean citizen, with the money earned and the tax I've paid, we've been betrayed by our government. And I think all the protesters feel like this.
By any measure, this is such a massive demonstration for the past 6 weekends consecutively. It can be compared to 2002 when there was a wave of protesters after the not guilty verdict rendered by the military court of the US forces in South Korea for the 2 GIs who ran over Hyosun and Misun, 2 junior high school girls. And there's another massive demonstration at the Gwanghwamun in front of the president's office in 2008 when the Lee Myung-bak government decided to open up the domestic market to the US beef import. But this is even larger than those 2 demonstrations. It is compared to the massive demonstration in 1987, in the April of 1987, which actually toppled down the Chun Doo-hwan government almost, and resulted in then the presidential candidate Mr. Roh Tae-woo to accept the demands for constitutional revision for direct presidential election by the opposition party leaders. So this is an unprecedented demonstration of public will that the Blue House must be held responsible for the scandals. And the difference between the previous massive demonstration of public will toward the government and this time is that it is very peaceful. It is even larger scale, but it is conducted in a very peaceful manner. Candlelight visuals showing new demonstration culture, which is more cultural celebration compared to the previous demonstration, which was a bit more violent.
이 정권의 어떤 실정들 이런 것들에 대한 분노가 이제 꽤 쌓여 있었습니다.
There was an accumulated anger on the real state of things in government, and it's a situation where the pent-up anger finally exploded, and because of the Chon Sung-sil gate, the people have been insulated as citizens. I think a lot of people feel this way, seeing reactions like, is this a country? It's these things combined what made large-scale protests happen.
그런 것들이 합쳐져서 대규모 시위가 되지 않았나 이렇게 보고 있습니다.
Widespread corruption is being uncovered at the highest levels of government in South Korea, and steps have been taken to deal with those responsible. How does this make the public feel about South Korea's democratic development?
I feel strongly that democracy seems to be regressing, and I doubt that this is in tune with the times. I feel anger and people's frustration are heavily expressed.
Before even all this happened in the news and stuff, I felt that it was wrong from the top. I think the fact became more clear throughout this incident.
Democracy in Korea has been repeatedly going backwards and forwards during the past, and I'm waiting for the day when democracy no longer goes backwards.
We see this as democracy, but the government isn't showing that. That's why we have to change all the higher officials in office right now.
Nothing is achieved easily. There are people who fought against the oppressive government in the past, and because of those people, we have the present. And the awakened people are attempting the same with these protests.
The current scandals are extreme embarrassments for South Korean people. South Korea has taken pride in being one of the longest mature democracy in Asia, alongside with Taiwan, the Philippines, and Japan. But we have witnessed the Blue House directly involved in kinds of scandals and criminal activities that could only be possible during the feudal era or medieval times. But this is almost like going back to the time when Korean people were living in dynasty. So there is a very strong sense of resignation and disappointment about lack of progress that we thought we made, but we were too complacent in terms of monitoring the government to respect the basic constitutional order and the rule by the law. But at the same time, the current scandals are kind of growing pain for South Korean democracy. You have to overcome so-called the legacy of President Park Geun-hye, who is a very checkered and controversial figure in modern history of Korean politics. By many people, he is regarded as a founding father who led the country from chronic poverty and constant threat from the North Korean threat, military threat, leading the country to economic prosperity. But for many others, he was a dictator, violating basic human rights in a very cruel fashion. The fact that Korean people chose to elect his daughter, the daughter of ex-President Park Geun-hye, the strongman, as a new president, was a clear signal that Korean people remain nostalgic of the Park Geun-hye era's economic progress and prosperity. And at the same time, it was testimony that Korean people were ready to move past the unfortunate past. But it is very unfortunate that his daughter, President Park Geun-hye, failed to live up to the people's trust and expectations.
30
years ago, after the June resistance, we overcame military dictatorship and a process towards democracy started. But paradoxically, the biggest beneficiaries were the family corporations. Regarding the recent protests and society after these protests, I think this is a path to achieving real democracy and getting past developmental democracy.
실질적 민주주의를 구현하기 위한 그런 과정이 되지 않을까 보고 있습니다.
The public have clearly lost faith in their president, who had sunk to a record low approval rating of just 4%, according to a Gallup Korea poll, with 91% disapproving of her presidency. Organisers claim that altogether over 6 million South Koreans have taken to the streets to demonstrate against her, though the police say a smaller number of people turned out. Even their figures put the tally at many hundreds of thousands.
Does the public believe the alleged corruption uncovered at the Blue House, the President's executive office and residence, during President Park Geun-hye's administration is the exception to the rule, or does it signify some wider problems in South Korean society?
I think this is an exceptionally strong case. There has been corruption in the past, but nothing has been uncovered to be this bad, and I feel that she is very incompetent. Yes, I do.
It signifies a wider problem in society. Korea needs democracy.
Recently, there are movies about corruption, but like the old saying, it's like the pot calls the kettle black. All those people, although I'm not sure of it, they must have known secretly. The people should be concerned and keep an eye on it continuously.
I think this incident is an indication of a wider problem in society. Although this is a country-wide matter, it could happen in a company, a school. It's a widespread national problem.
It's not just a problem limited to our country. Every country has their own problems. And it's how you express those problems that matters. These are hard times, economically and socially, and the people are struggling to fight against that. However, seeing the president we have elected and the people surrounding her using their power for their own good is so upsetting and sad.
Many people are afraid that the revelation of the collusion between the big corporations such as Samsung, SK and Lotte and the Blue House may be just the tip of an iceberg. If that is a tip of an iceberg, how large is the iceberg itself? That's what people are afraid of. But at the same time, this is probably the beginning of a new era in which the Park Geun-hye style of economic development is no longer effective or acceptable. The collusion between big businesses and the government used to be at least condoned by the public in the name of getting the national economy to take off so that the corporations would remain competitive in the international market. But that kind of collusion between the state and the big corporations is no longer justifiable in the 21st century. And corporations are also very well aware of that, because no matter how much so-called political donation that corporation would give to the politicians and the members of the government, it is far from guaranteeing their business interest, as well illustrated by recent revelations. So corporations will become far more reluctant and resistant to any demand and pressure from the government and the politicians for financially backing them up. And conversely, the government's capacity to wring money from big corporations is also far limited after all these scandals are settled. So in the long run, this is good. This is good in increasing the transparency in the system in South Korean economy. The good example is the Asian financial crisis in 1997-1998. Yes, the Asian financial crisis is a big disaster for companies and individuals alike. But after the financial crisis, South Korean financial system began to attain far more transparency, meeting the international standards and practices. So there must be good virtues coming out of current scandals in terms of making South Korea's economic and financial system far more reliable, far more transparent, and freer from government intervention.
후자겠죠. 아무래도 그러니까 재벌들이 무슨 이
Corporations are not victims. We shouldn't view it as if their arms were twisted by Chung Sil-si to pay money, but were guaranteed a lot of things by doing so. The reality is that the Park administration practices pro-corporate policies, anti-labor policies, anti-farmer policies, anti-poor policies, and most of their policies are against the will of the people. Some may say these connections aren't the direct reasons, but overall it's a widespread part of our society and should be improved.
보는 부분이 그렇게 뭐 일부겠지만 그래서 전반적으로는 이제 우리 사회에 그런 부분들이 만연하고 그런 것들이 이제 개선돼야 한다 이렇게 보고 있습니다.
One way or another, it looks like South Korean President Park Geun-hye will probably leave office early. What does the public think about where South Korea goes from here?
First, they should stop seeking their own interest and should represent the people's will. I wish of a man of integrity, and a leader who considers people's welfare will become president.
In what direction would I say? I hope Korea heads in the right direction. No deceiving, just head in the right direction. I hope we're heading that way.
As I've said earlier, I wish our government doesn't go backwards in democracy, only toward full democratic development.
I hope these kinds of problems won't happen in the future. We should vote very carefully.
I'm neither considered as the younger generation or the older generation. I'm in the middle. But through these opportunities, I think this can definitely be the chance to become a better country. The protests reflect our people's thoughts, and the people who take power should acknowledge this and should head in a better direction for our country.
It is widely expected that President Park Geun-hye will shorten her tenure as a president and step down, allegedly in ordered and lawful manner. So everybody is keeping very watchful eyes about the future of the presidency as well as the future of this nation. And it is very unfortunate, to say the least, to see off the sitting president unable to finish the term of 5 years. It is another repetition of unfortunate pattern in history of Korean politics, in which presidents are either charged after they step down for corruptions or any other wrongdoings. President Chun Doo-hwan had to go to remote temple to avoid public criticism and anger. And Roh Tae-woo was charged for mutiny and bribery and served jail time. And President Kim Young-sam had a trouble with his son, meddling with political affairs. And President Kim Dae-jung also had to see his son, serving jail time. The only exception has been the predecessor of current president, former President Lee Myung-bak. So we thought that we began to have the luxury of not having to worry about the future of the former presidents after they step down. But the current scandals involving President Park Geun-hye seems to indicate that South Korean politics is still anachronic, still far from allowing the public to relax and stretch to relax after the presidents are done with their tenures.
지금 과제는 이제 광장,
Our task for now is that the protests, we'll call them the plaza, how should we converge the will of the people politically, institutionally, and carry out the reformation that the people want? And we are making an effort to do so.
그걸 위해서 지금 이렇게 노력하고 있는 거라고 보시면 될 것 같습니다.
The special prosecutor, Park Yong-soo, has stated he will investigate closely at what presidential power went into compelling corporations to donate funds to certain foundations, and whether this constitutes bribery to the tune of over $6.5 million. Sometimes it can be better to approach an issue head-on than to come at it from an angle, he told reporters.
Despite using political tactics to stay in office, the South Korean president faces massive public pressure to leave, plus the growing spectre of corruption charges. It seems almost certain she will step down before her term ends. In the meantime, how much harm her refusal to leave sooner will cause to the reputation of South Korea's democracy, only time will tell.